style that was totally different from anything that Doc Watson and Earl Scruggs or Bill Monroe could offer. And my intersection with those people was based on the degree to which they might be interested in using older styles for newer forms. And when I found that they weren't, or they were grounded in what they were doing and there was nothing more to be said, I don't think Phil and I ever had another conversation. It wasn't anything hostile, it was just we didn't have anything in common.
No common ground.
You took Joan to visit Doc.
Took Joan to visit Doc. Well, that's because she wanted to meet him. She wanted to see his community and the people. It was very strange. We were touring, and we had been to New Mexico and gone swimming in a crater when Joan was at the height of her popularity, and thinking we were escaping in the crater of this former volcano, the top of the mountain, we heard her voice floating across the river from the dock where we rented the rowboat that we were all jumping out of, singing Silver Dagger or something like that. And that night at Canyon de Chelly at the National Park Service restaurant, some elderly ladies came up and wanted her autograph. Oh my God, you can't even go to Canyon de Chelly and escape from renown. And yet when she came to Doc Watson's, when we were playing in Atlanta and we drove up there, they all played music, then she came and listened to it. And then she sang for them and they didn't know what to make of it. Might as well have been Marian Anderson singing an opera. They were totally nonplussed and non-responsive and unimpressed and disinterested. And Joan was kind of surprised at this. I don't think she was embarrassed or crestfallen. But it was a strange thing to see, Joan standing on a front porch in the depth of Appalachia, singing Silver Dagger to the people who had heard it sung very differently all their lives.
You talked of 15,000 people, for instance, cheering Dewey Balfour when you first brought him to Newport. I'm wondering, do you have any sense of how much of that impact was lasting on many people, or was it ephemeral? It came and went with the night and the mood.
I think most of Newport was a beer drinking, kind of good time weekend for college kids to get together and have fun.
Mm-hmm.
In the midst of that, there were certain people who found the spirit and whose lives were irreversibly changed. People who heard, some people heard Dylan and followed him to the end of the world, and other people heard Doc Watson or Bill Monroe and did likewise. So there were instant conversions at every Newport, so deep and important that it changed the lives of those people. But percentage-wise, I think it was pretty small.
Okay.
Well, Nancy Squeezy was one example of that, but it wasn't musically. She was so moved by the craft items that Ralph brought up to Newport that she ran a craft store with Ralph in order to sell the stuff because it wasn't selling to any of the drinkers at Newport. But then she moved south and helped to completely retread a southern pottery in North Carolina, such that if you look at the whole history of the area, it revitalized the whole pottery area of the Piedmont of North Carolina. And there's a bunch of potters now scattered around the country, some of them there whom she had as apprentices at Jugtown. And then later sold Jugtown back to the senior potters there, the master potter there, and went north and started working with, but she was a potter herself. Interesting.
The other side of the coin is the effect on the musicians, and you saw them in a big city club, and I am wondering, I've read some stories of culture shock among people who were brought up to play at Newport and clubs and were never quite comfortable with it. Did you see any of that at all?
Well, it would be hard for me to know what was going on in the minds of the people that came to the club, but Doc speaks in one interview with Bert Lloyd about how amazed he was to play for what he calls a listening audience. He talks of 1962 Chicago Festival where he could hear the audience breathe in between verses of an unaccompanied song, an unaccompanied ballad that he was singing, and that they would talk about weeping to the words of the ballad. He never thought that he would ever find an audience. But he also talks about, absolutely trembling with fear and going on in front of 15,000 people or something like that. I think Bill Monroe said something about the northern audiences don't applaud when you play a break, because they didn't have the convention of applauding for breaks. And they'd wait until the end of the tune, so you wouldn't know whether they liked it or not until, they applauded, enthusiastically at the end of a number. So there were those things. As far as also there was there were changes. Ralph can speak to that in some of the pattern, and I'm not so much sure of the repertoire, but like stand-up comedy kinds of things that would have been perfectly considered appropriate in the South because they were racist were no longer appropriate in the North. And the musicians may have felt that as culture shock if they suddenly felt that, that they were no longer in the racist milieu, or at least the liberal audiences that they were playing to were not the racists that they were playing to in the South.
Yeah, I don't want to take up your whole afternoon,
Yeah,
so I don't want to.
Well, that's okay.
Let me, along that line, there's a story I read, and I don't remember the name of the musician involved, and I don't know if it was given in the story, but it was a Black Delta blues musician who said that when I'm at home and I'm playing at house parties or I play at bars, we would plug in. And we'd plug in because people wanted to dance, and it was what we liked to do on a Saturday night. And then I go up north, and if I do that, I'm not authentic enough.
Right,
I can't do that, and I had to play acoustic. And I'm wondering, and I thought of this earlier when you were talking to me about Doc Watson saying I don't have an acoustic guitar, and I'm wondering if what I flashed on then was a tension between are you reaching back for something that is within them and is indigenous to them, or are you changing what they normally do, and because of were people seeking their own sense of what was authentic in these musicians?
I think in the Sounds of the South book, which just came out from the conference held at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, 3 years ago. Bill Malone, who is country and grew up in country, refers to the perspective that I think Mike and I and John represent, Lomax too, as romantic, a romantic perspective. And so in that sense, the first thing that you mentioned, we're reshaping or reaching back for something earlier, is very much the case. I think a lot of people would rather be to follow their natural line. But on the other hand, 10 years after Doc was launched as a folk singer, I asked him to come to the Smithsonian to show the range of his styles with his mother and his father-in-law and his wife and kids, and to start with his mother singing an unaccompanied ballad as he heard it as a child, and end with an electric guitar tune and fill everything else in between. And to my astonishment, he was taken aback. He said, "I'd have to think about that, son." And he called me back a day or two later, or I called him. He said, "I don't think I can do that." I said, "What can't you do?" He said, "I can't play an electric guitar tune as the closer or on that program." I said, "Why?" He said, "It would ruin my image." And he did.
You did the program, but without electric guitar.
Yeah, he came and did the program, but without the electric guitar closer. He didn't, at that point, probably even have an electric guitar. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, in part. I don't know that there's an answer to my question, but it at least confirms the sense that there is a...
Charlie Seeger wrote an article, the folkness of the non-folk and the non-folkness of the folk, or something like that.
That's it. He also said about Peggy that she represented a phenomenon of which Nashville represented the other half. And he said that the city Billy and the hillbilly were passing each other in the same boat going in opposite directions.
Okay.
He was fascinated with that, folkness, non-folkness.
Well, the pressures of the commercialization of all of the culture produced, aspirations in people.
Some people must have
And
wanted to be
Doc
stars,
and everybody else.
yeah.
And you have the music industry and
Yeah.
people trying to succeed in the music industry and skewing tradition in order to succeed in the music industry by playing faster, by making up special riffs that would be identified as them, by singing things vocally non-traditional style, by it's a very complicated phenomenon and the one that has fascinated me because I've been reading about it lately is Bill Monroe, who comes from a string band tradition, goes to the Grand Ole Opry, starts playing in B flat, B natural, and E when the three traditional keys are C,
A, G, and C.
A, G, and C.
Indeed.
And all of the traditional fiddlers who play on the Grand Ole Opry can't play with him because he's playing in keys that they don't play in, so he has to personally train all of the fiddlers to play in his band, but he sticks strictly to non-amplified instruments, to creating a musical genre which became bluegrass, and making the whole thing up whole cloth, singing sentimental songs that speak to the people from the mountains, to Southern culture, to people raised with string band music all around them, that says to them, you can still have your string band music, but boy, ain't we great, aren't we sharp?
Uh-huh.
And he dressed in absolutely immaculate, sharp suits with a Stetson hat, absolutely refused to play to the hillbilly stereotype that was proselytized by Grand Ole Opry. I mean, they were constantly putting on people with their teeth blacked out and the hick thing and all of that. Bill refused to do that, but he also, and he revered the old-time string band musicians, and yet he created a form that was discontinuous with the string band tradition, at the same time as being a string band tradition. It was very uptown, very sharp, much faster than anybody played before. It was, Nashville, and it wasn't Nashville. It's complicated.
Coming back to your question about when did the revival start bringing people to town. After the Lomaxes did it in the 30s and 40s, what happened was Harry Smith released the anthology of American folk music, 2 on Folkways, and a lot of kids heard it. Tom Haley, myself, John, Mike. Now, they had already been listening to stuff that record collectors had come up with, but that seemed to really have had an impact. Because so many other people heard it who loved it, that immediately created the potential for an audience out there. And the Lomax issues, Listen to My Story and Mountain Frolic, were in the same vein as what Harry Smith had done, and were still available. So the Smith thing just kind of pushed it further along. And once the Ramblers started performing in '58, you had a whole new segment of the revival develop that was interested in old-time music. And quite apart from that, but I think also related to the reissue syndrome and the record collectors' activity, people who were interested in blues were going out and relocating people like Son House and Skip James, etc. And so the two things went on parallel tracks. I don't think there was a great causal relationship between the timing, except the fact that both groups were represented on Smith's anthology. I think that had a seminal influence. So coming off of that, kids went out and relocated people and started bringing them back. And the old time music was one of several efforts. And a lot of them being individual. This was the organization John, Izzy, and I put together.
And you stayed with Newport until when?
Formally till '69. In '67 I started the Smithsonian program and spent less time on Newport after '68 and '69. '69 was the last. It happened in '69. Yeah, it happened in '69, but that's it.
One more topic I just wanted to, are you okay on time?
Yeah, I don't have anything scheduled.
Okay. Which is what you touched on, Kate, is also the political side to this, during the civil rights movement. But it seems that folk music has always had this leftist view, or people thought of it that way. That trying to, for us, particularly with the cultural aspect of how did this affect perhaps the counterculture of the '60s, to talk a little bit about that whole movement, maybe where its roots and why it was viewed that way, and where did that all come from? Is that just from the topical songs, or I'm not sure. I'm just trying.
Most people we find when we talk about this, I think most people generally see a left-wing connection between to folk music and.
But listening to the
I don't know where it comes from if you
right.
start looking at
Indigenous type of music,
the music that you've
it's
devoted yourself
just
to.
Just listening to what you said, you say, well, that's not exactly, that's not left-wing music.
I don't know if it all comes from Woody Guthrie writing topical songs to
Yeah.
or labor songs to traditional
How much
melodies.
reading have you done?
That's hard to say. How much is there? I've done.
I don't agree with the anti-Stalinist slant and characterization of Denisov, The Great Day of Coming. There's a book you should read because it documents what you're asking for. That there was, an actual cultural line in the Communist Party that led people to it. And, Archie Green will probably give you the whole
Yeah, we've read about that and talked to Archie about that.
He's also very anti-communist.
Yes.
Right.
So, but there were people who were in the Communist Party who felt inspired, to do things in the cultural vein, who later became disenchanted with the Communist Party and cause, and perhaps, didn't want to be associated with that, and yet whose actual work over time has been tremendously powerful cultural work. But I mean, from my understanding, Woody Guthrie would have loved to have been in the Communist Party if they'd taken, but they thought he was a little bit too nuts. And there were people like in the Communist Party organized in the coal mines, and there were singers, great songwriters and singers who came out of that who were totally indigenous people, just the folks, like Nellie Jackson and Sarah Gunning and
Jim Garland.
And there were other people in the South who probably looked very much askance at that, who came from the same tradition as they did, but thought it was dangerous to be involved in any of those politics. And it certainly was a highly motivating force in the British folk revival. It was because folk music is people's music. I don't know if Ralph would have said any of that, but that's you're talking about grassroots music. The grassroots is the people.
Music of poor people primarily.
Yeah, poor people whose music is not always a music of protest unless they have been enlivened by an ideology which makes them feel that there is something that can be done about it. So without perhaps the Communist Party and that kind of organizing at that time in history, or the Wobblies at an earlier time in history, you may never have had a whole genre of songs that are now published in hard times, and hard-hitting songs for hard-hit people, and those kinds of things. I mean, to pretend that there was no movement, it would be like pretending that there was no civil rights movement and saying, well, isn't "We Shall Overcome" nice? it, that would be putting the lie to it. And the things that were advocated were labor union organizing, civil rights, anti-racism, health issues, save the family farm, and sharecroppers organizing the South. We're organizing the sharecroppers union, and there were songs that came out of that. And they were the songs that appealed to a lot of Northerners who may have been very tangentially involved, politically speaking, just sort of, liberal to left leaning, but loved the songs that expressed feminism or some kind of protest or another. I think it also, it fed the whole, to me, Pete Seeger is absolutely a seminal figure with Bob Dylan, any of those songwriters of that generation. If you look back into their history, at some point they rubbed up against Pete Seeger and said, my God, I can write my own songs. My God, I have a political identity. I can say something that means something. And the two things that were crucial, historic things in that period were the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. And they were, I think, rightfully identified by a whole generation as issues that had nothing to do with communism and much to do with, with what we say is our democratic, heritage, etc. And flew in the face of that.
We are always interested in stuff, and ultimately folks who know of sources of pictures and archival footage. I don't know if much of that exists from the Ash Grove, or if you are aware of
Nothing
it.
from the Ash
A lot of
Grove.
footage from
Nothing,
Newport,
Yeah,
though.
there's plenty
A lot.
of music from the Ash Grove, but no photographs of the
Mhm.
Newport. Yeah.
Who took the time to Newport?
Murray Lerner and George Picot primarily.
But Ralph, you should have answered. I shouldn't have opened my big gap
No,
on the
it's-
political
That was
issue.
That was a very good.
It was very
Dennis
interesting.
I mean, it's interesting today that Scotland is on the verge of actually perhaps getting its independence from England. Well, the Scottish folk revival, such as it was a political thing. And it had to do with the possibility of having a cultural identity which was not dominated by England. And, I think that it's, infinitely more complicated and less, has less anything. I think that you need that kind of political focusing of things in order for people to really become inspired to have a sort of a movement. Well, the other thing, of course, which I didn't mention because I guess I was too much on the periphery of it, but the whole back to the land, hippie, drug-related thing. Obviously, that was a very big force back then.
Mhm.
One that neither Ralph nor I were interested in participating in, and sort of skirted out of. We weren't particularly interested in the musical manifestations, although I think the Ramblers could speak to the issue of homegrown music and commune life going hand in hand, playing the dulcimer and having a string band, dancing, the whole revival of folk dance forms, not just Western swing square, but, all kinds of fluorescence of dance forms came out of that liberation from having to, aspire to the 8-hour day job and all that.
Well, it's interesting because as we said initially when we started this, it was really with the thought of the political side to it. But, some people just feel in many respects they're very different. And so it's interesting. That's why I kind of throw out that question to people just to see viewpoints.
Well, Bill Monroe refused to play at a Carnegie Hall concert in 58, 59, because people told him that Alan Lomax was a communist. So it was the less politically motivated people who were able to really interact with some of the Southerns, who did come north and did play Newport and the clubs and all of that. And if they had thought that all those folks were communists, they wouldn't have come. Because there was a broader audience for all the whole thing. It had nothing to do with super leftward causes. And an awful lot of people who were perhaps initially involved in thinking about that, because they were communists, were later terribly distressed by the invasion of Hungary and the pact with Hitler and things that just alienated them and they said, well, I made a mistake. That was not a very good idea to identify with the politics of another country. It's much more to look at what liberal causes are in this country. We still need to look at what our liberal causes in this country. I mean, we're in such a reactionary era now that I think back to the grassroots to look at just issues like toxic waste dumps, water pollution, major pollution of water supplies all over the country. There's all kinds of issues there that need advocates. They need a movement. We need to create the songs to go along with it.
Well, that's Dick Flack's thesis that, it might elevate it to say it's a thesis, but this idea that music provides at least some common ground in which at least some people who might do some work can get together. Most of them will wallow in it and listen to it, but some people can get together. I'm interested in your comment in Bill Monroe, and it reminded me of something that Norm Cohen mentioned in his booklet that accompanied the Smithsonian collection. He said that there were some real culture clashes between the musicians, the vernacular musicians, and the people who were putting on the folk festivals, let alone the audience at the folk festivals. Did you see examples of that, either at Newport or at the club when you were programming?
Terribly impressed by a whole bunch of hippie kids smoking a lot of pot and getting drunk.
Yeah,
I think it would have been very
a lot of people
distressing.
put off by that.
I would think at some point these people, feel like icons as opposed to musicians in that description.
Well,
Yeah.
as you've described, there's the desire to play before larger audiences as well, and to get a piece of the commercial pie on behalf of many people.
The shift to the Folklife Festival at the Smithsonian was a strategic one. It was no longer hippie kids or upper middle class, youth from New York who wanted to smoke and drink and listen to Joan Baez. It was the audience. It was Joe Q. Public, your cousin, who happened to have come for the summer with their family to see the Smithsonian and were delighted to find you in the mall, or, who had specifically come because they'd heard that there was, Czechoslovakian American contingent to this festival, and they were Czech Americans themselves, and they were bringing their cousins to, and the people were coming from Czechoslovakia to play the music from over there, and it was entirely different. The constituency was utterly different, but they were playing to themselves. Now, not always. I mean, some people say that when Lloyd Watson came from the South, speaking this very deep dialect in an idiolect that was, like from the 19th century. George Holt said to us once, when I saw that, I thought that all the folks in the mountains thought like Lloyd Watson, and you misled me, because when I became the state folklorist of North Carolina, I found out there were very few Willard Watsons up there. He happened to be, you know, sort of like a supreme example of a particularly archaic cultural type, but the intention of the festival was not to stereotype and say this is a hillbilly, you know, and make a freak out of Willard Watson, but to humanize the whole thing of diversity and just thoroughly enjoy what an incredible sense of humor Willard Watson had, and what a fabulous communicator he was. And Willard had a fabulous time at the festival. He just ate it up. He would tell you anytime, and he just loved coming to the festival. There may be other people who came to the festival who were very racist and didn't like being in dorms with black people. But maybe they learned something about it.
Well, yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's fine.
let these people go.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
All right.
Vanguard sold to, well, a whole lot of their stuff. That was through 65, maybe through 65. And after that, stuff that was recorded went to State University of New York at Buffalo.
Bruce Jackson?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we've talked to him very briefly, but we haven't talked to him. We're going to have to...
Do you have Mary Catherine Alden in there?
No.
She's the one that's issuing
out the Will
records
stuff.
now for Will.
Oh, okay. Okay, I've seen Alden.
Yeah.
Alden, A-E-L-D-E-N, Mary Catherine Alden.
Okay.
If you need a telephone number and
Yeah.
address for her. Do you have it here?
The Newport recordings are being issued on CD, Fast and Furious.
Yeah.
I'm seeing...
That's because of her
Yeah.
information. She went to
Yeah.
Ralph and said, don't you want to hire me? Because I know this stuff and love it. And she's been issuing.
What is her background? What is,
I remember Mary Catherine as somebody who came to the Asheville in the early years as an enthusiast, and what she did in the interim, I really don't know.
She's resurfaced in this connection?
She resurfaced, yes. But she seems to know a lot
I'll write it down as
of
well.
people in the industry.
Yeah, I did it as well.
We have our communal pen?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
Put it on tape.
Yeah.
213. Old, A-L-D-E-N, Mary
Mary
Catherine. 213-850-8625.
You would
I'll
probably
take it
know
down
where
again.
the Asheville is.
Yeah, let's see. 213-250-8287. Is that a...
Ralph, do you have his telephone number there?
No, but mine is something
Oh,
that's here, that tells you that you guys will get it reopened as a,
Oh, there's a... Let me see. Let's take this down. Because it's not the number we have. I don't know what number we've got. It might be... Nor do I know where we got our number.
310, I wonder what that is.
Oh,
The
they
new
should,
number
that's
for
the
Santa
new
Monica.
area code for Santa Monica. They've issued
Oh,
a
it
new-
is?
Yeah.
They've split the LA region.
I see.
Once again.
Oh.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah,
because we go through our, or people,
Other than, yeah, Bernice,
He's on a fast now against the Haitian.
right, we actually never
Negotiation.
had this. Other than people using, or that.
Just got a letter from her, which I think I said, so I can look at it.
John Cohen we've talked to on the telephone. I've talked to him, and we're not going to be able to see him on this trip, but I'm going to try and get him next time we're in New York, since we come back to see Doreen's parents a couple of times a year and leave our baby with them, which is provides a nice mutual sharing.
Right.
um,